Older men often underestimate just how much their presence alone influences the way younger women respond to them. They assume that attraction is purely a game of youth, that smiles and glances belong to the young, but they fail to recognize something deeper at play. When a younger woman smiles at an older man, it's not necessarily because of his looks, his wealth, or some external status symbol. It's because of the way he carries himself. It's the quiet confidence, the deeply rooted self-assurance, the absence of nervous fidgeting and self-doubt. You see, young men are often filled with uncertainty. They're still finding their place, still constructing an identity, still wrestling with insecurities that make them hesitate, overthink, or seek validation. They may try too hard, overcompensate, or display bravado in a way that feels forced. But an older man, if he has truly lived, if he has been tested by life, does not need to seek approval in the same way. His confidence isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. Instead, it's grounded. It's steady. And that is precisely what draws people in. A younger woman, whether she's aware of it or not, can sense this. It's not a matter of conscious thought. It's something deeper, something primal. Confidence signals security, and security is attractive on every level. It's not about arrogance. Arrogance is hollow. It's desperate. It masks insecurity rather than overcoming it. But true confidence, that's rare. It's the result of overcoming hardship, of learning difficult lessons, of becoming a man who knows who he is and does not need to prove it to anyone. This is why an older man can walk into a room without the need to assert dominance, without the need to be the loudest or the most attention-seeking, and yet people notice. It's why his movements are deliberate, his gaze steady, his posture upright but never forced. The younger men, they're still trying to impress. They're still trying to figure out the game. But the older man, he has already played it and he's moved on to something greater. And that shift in energy, that lack of desperation, that quiet but undeniable self-possession, that is what makes younger women smile. Of course, this isn't to say that every older man possesses this quality. Many don't. Many remain just as lost, just as uncertain as they were in their youth. They never took responsibility. They never learned from their experiences. They never grew into their own potential. And so they don't inspire respect, admiration, or even curiosity. They blend into the background, invisible, because they never developed the strength of character that naturally commands attention. But when a man has truly lived, when he has faced the trials of life and come out the other side with wisdom rather than bitterness, with understanding rather than resentment, he carries that in every step, in every word, in every moment of stillness. And that is something rare, something noticeable, a smile in passing, a moment of eye contact. It's not always attraction in the way men assume. It's not necessarily about romantic interest. Sometimes it's a recognition of something different, something solid, something admirable in a world that is often chaotic, uncertain, and filled with people who are still trying to find their footing. It's a small but undeniable acknowledgement of a presence that stands apart from the rest, and that in itself is worth noticing. There's something about the way a man speaks that tells you everything about who he is. It's not just the words he chooses, though those matter. It's the way he delivers them, the way he listens, the way he engages. And you see, younger men, they often struggle with this. They're too eager, too impulsive, too wrapped up in themselves to notice the finer details of a conversation. They're either trying to prove something or they're second-guessing every word that comes out of their mouths. But an older man, if he's paid attention, if he's truly learned from his experiences, he doesn't speak just to fill the silence. He speaks with purpose, with clarity, with an understanding that conversation isn't just about saying what's on your mind. It's about knowing when to say nothing at all. Younger women notice this. They may not articulate it. They may not even fully understand why, but they feel it. There's a comfort in speaking to a man who actually listens, who doesn't interrupt, who isn't waiting for his turn to talk, but is instead fully present in the moment. He's not distracted. He's not looking over her shoulder for something better. He's not scrambling to impress. He understands the rhythm of human interaction because he's had time to refine it. He knows when to be direct and when to let something unfold naturally. And in a world that moves at breakneck speed, where people are constantly half listening while scrolling through their phones, that kind of attention is disarmingly rare. And it's not just about listening. It's about knowing what to say and, more importantly, what not to say. The young men, they blurt things out. They fumble through their sentences. They over-explain. They try to be funny or charming in a way that often comes across as forced. They don't yet understand the power of restraint. They don't realize that silence used correctly is just as powerful as speech. But an older man, a man who has lived and learned, he knows that well-placed pauses, a measured response, a thoughtful question, those are the marks of someone who is truly engaged, someone who understands the flow of conversation rather than simply reacting to it. There's also a level of emotional control that comes with experience. Younger men are prone to frustration, to defensiveness, to emotional outbursts that betray a lack of self-mastery. They take things personally, they misunderstand intent, they react too quickly, too intensely. But an older man, he's been through enough to know that most things aren't worth getting worked up over. He's learned the difference between standing firm in his beliefs and picking unnecessary fights. He doesn't need to win every argument because he understands that real strength isn't about domination, it's about composure. And that right there is a major reason why younger women respond to him differently, because emotional stability is attractive. It creates an environment where people feel safe, where they can express themselves without fear of sudden anger or passive-aggressive games. There's a certain ease in speaking with someone who isn't rattled by minor inconveniences, who doesn't lash out when challenged, who doesn't need to prove his worth in every interaction. All of this combines into something that's difficult to define but impossible to ignore. It's a sense of refinement, of presence, of control, not control over others, but control over oneself. And when a younger woman smiles at an older man sometimes, that's all it is, a quiet acknowledgement of someone who understands the deeper nuances of human interaction, who isn't in a rush to prove himself, who simply exists in the moment with the kind of grace and awareness that only comes with time. But there's something interesting that happens as a man ages. If he has paid attention, if he has learned, if he has taken responsibility for himself, he stops trying so hard. And that in itself makes all the difference. Because younger men, they're often in a rush to prove themselves. They enter a room with a kind of nervous energy, a need to be seen, to be validated, to make an impression. And that urgency, that desperation, it leaks into their interaction. It makes their presence feel strained, almost demanding. But an older man, he doesn't need to do that. He's already established himself, at least in the ways that truly matter. He's not scanning the room for approval. He's not adjusting his posture every few seconds to make himself look bigger or more imposing. He just is, and that is precisely what makes him so noticeable. You see, when a younger woman smiles at an older man, it's often because she recognizes something different in him, an ease, a calmness, a presence that isn't seeking anything from her. She doesn't feel like a target, like she's being pursued or evaluated. She doesn't feel the weight of expectation in his glance. Instead, there's a kind of openness in the way he carries himself, a quiet self-assurance that says, I am perfectly fine as I am. And that is incredibly rare, because so much of male interaction, especially among younger men, is about positioning, about competition, about demonstrating value. And you can see it in the way they engage with women. There's an underlying tension, a performative aspect to their confidence. It's the difference between genuine presence and a rehearsed act. Younger women sense this instinctively. They know when they're talking to a man who is simply existing versus one who is trying to convince her of something, convince her that he's strong or charming or capable. But an older man, a man who has nothing to prove, his presence alone communicates those things without him needing to say a word. There's also a certain non-threatening quality that comes with a man who is at peace with himself. Not weak, not passive, just solid. A younger man, particularly one who is insecure, may come across as aggressive, and so he needs to force the world to acknowledge him. He may overstep, misread signals, push too hard. And that creates an underlying discomfort, a sense of unease. But a man who has lived long enough to understand himself, to regulate his own impulses, to engage with people without ulterior motives, he isn't threatening. He isn't trying to take something. And that, paradoxically, makes him more compelling. Because a smile isn't always an invitation. It isn't always an indication of attraction in the way men assume. Sometimes it's simply a response to someone who makes them feel at ease, who isn't pulling them into some unspoken social game. And when an older man receives that smile, it's not because he's trying to get it. It's because in that moment he represents something steady, something unhurried, something that isn't grasping for attention or validation. And that in itself is something worth striving for, not for the smile, not for the recognition, but because to reach that level of presence, that level of self-possession, is to be a man who truly understands what it means to stand in the world without needing it to affirm his worth. And once you've reached that point, well, the rest tends to follow. There's something undeniable about a man who has built something for himself. And I don't just mean wealth, though that can be a part of it. I mean competence, accomplishment, a depth of experience that separates him from the rest. It's written in the way he carries himself, in the way he speaks, in the way he navigates the world. He has survived failure, learned from hardship, overcome obstacles that would have broken a lesser man, and because of that, he is not easily shaken. There is a sense of certainty in his actions, a quiet authority that doesn't come from arrogance, but from having earned his place. Younger men, they're still in the process of figuring it all out. They're still proving themselves to others, to women, even to themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the journey, but it creates a different kind of energy, an underlying restlessness, a hunger for validation that is often more apparent than they realize. When they enter a conversation, there is effort in their presence, an attempt to be seen a certain way. But when a man has already established himself, when he has built something, learned from his past, taken on responsibility in a meaningful way, he doesn't need to try so hard. He simply is. And that changes everything. A younger woman notices this, often without even realizing why. She sees a man who is not chasing approval, who is not scrambling to prove his worth, who does not need to be the center of attention. And that in itself is compelling, because so many interactions in the modern world are driven by insecurity, by people who need constant reassurance, who need to be validated, who are looking outward to find a sense of identity. But a man who has already done the work, he doesn't need that. He's not looking to be completed by anything external. And that level of self-possession is striking. It stands out. It's not just about confidence. It's about a sense of mastery over oneself and one's life. A man who has spent years refining his craft, who has developed skills, who has contributed to something greater than himself, he has a depth that younger men often lack. He has stories to tell, wisdom to share, insights that go beyond surface level conversation. He has seen enough of the world to understand what truly matters. And that makes his presence different. It makes his words carry weight. There is also an element of stability that comes with experience. A younger man might still be figuring out his path, uncertain of where he is going, unsure of what he wants. And while that's natural, it also creates a kind of unpredictability, a sense of impermanence that can be unsettling. But a man who has established himself, who has built something with his own hands, whether it be a career, a business, a body of knowledge, he is anchored. He does not drift aimlessly. He does not crumble under pressure. He does not need to be rescued or reassured. And that kind of grounded presence is rare. This isn't about impressing people. It's not about seeking admiration or trying to be something you're not. It's about becoming a man of substance, a man whose life is built on more than fleeting pleasures or external validation. And when a younger woman smiles at an older man, it is often a subtle acknowledgement of that difference. A recognition, however small, of someone who has done the work, who has walked the path, who is not just another voice in the crowd, but someone worth noticing,